I was just another face in the crowd that day, standing behind the dust and the noise at the Billings livestock auction. No one knew me. No one noticed. And honestly, I didn't plan to stand out. Then he limped into the ring. A German Shepherd. One hind leg twisted at an angle that made it clear he'd been like that for a while. Mud clung to his fur in thick mats, and a thin scar circled his neck like a shadow that refused to fade. His ribs pushed through his sides like bones, trying to escape a body that had been fighting too long. He didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't beg. He just stood there, barely trembling under the weight of all those eyes that looked at him and saw a problem, not a creature. The auctioneer, usually full of fire, faltered. There wasn't much to pitch. The murmurs started. Probably bit someone. Not worth the trouble. Put him down? No one raised a hand. Not a single soul. They didn't even pity him. It wasn't that kind of silence. It was colder. The kind of silence that says he's not worth it. Just as the auctioneer lifted his gavel to move on to have the dog removed, I did something I hadn't done in years. I raised my hand. No words. No explanation. Just a quiet gesture from the back of the barn. Heads turned. Eyes scanned. No one knew me. Just some guy in a worn leather jacket. Boots still caked in Montana mud. A scar riding my jawline like a secret I didn't want to share. But that moment changed everything. The gavel dropped. Sold. Confusion rippled across the crowd. Whispers followed. Why him? Why that dog? They wouldn't understand. Not then. I walked slowly down the aisle, not because I was unsure, but because I knew exactly what I was walking toward. The dog raised his head when I approached. His legs shook, but his eyes, those tired amber eyes, locked onto mine, like they'd been searching for something familiar. I didn't grab him. Didn't force anything. I just knelt, held out my hand, open, still. He leaned into it. Just a little. Like he was trying to believe contact didn't always hurt. And then he did something I hadn't expected. He breathed. Not a sigh. Not relief. Just breath. Like it was the first time in a long while he thought he might be allowed to stay alive. Someone in the crowd recorded it. The video went viral later, but it didn't capture what mattered. Not really. Not the way he leaned on me. Not the weight of that moment. It definitely didn't capture what I was thinking. I wasn't rescuing him. I was coming home. The drive back was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the wind rustling through the trees, shedding the last of their autumn leaves. My old pickup grumbled, like always, protesting every bump in the road, but I didn't mind. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, watching the dog curled in the back, eyes cracked open, never fully resting. He didn't trust it yet. The silence, the ride, or me. And I didn't blame him. I live on the edge of Laurel, Montana, tucked against the tree line, where no one wanders unless they're lost. My cabin's not much. The porch leans like an old man with a secret. There's a wood stove, a bed that hasn't been shared in years, and enough quiet to make some folks go mad. I carried the dog inside like something sacred, like I was afraid the floor might give out beneath us both. He didn't fight me, didn't flinch, but he didn't rest either. I laid him near the hearth on an old flannel blanket, added some towels, and stoked the fire until the warmth started to creep through the room. Even then, he didn't close his eyes. He just lay there tracking my every movement. That night, I made stew. Nothing fancy, just enough to fill the space. He didn't eat. He didn't move. He just watched. Every step I took, every time I reached for something, his eyes followed. Not because he was curious, but because he was waiting. Waiting for the switch to flip. Waiting for pain. For noise. For violence. It wasn't fear. It was defense. I didn't speak to him. Not really. Until I sat across from him and said quietly, "Rook." He twitched. Ears barely moved, but enough to show he'd heard. "That's your name now," I said softer. He didn't respond. Didn't reject it either. But something in the room changed. Like the wind outside decided it didn't need to rattle the windows anymore. I stayed sitting for hours. Didn't read. Didn't touch him. Just stayed. Watched the fire. He didn't close his eyes once. But he never looked away. When the fire cracked loud enough to make him flinch, I moved gently, reached for a blanket, and laid it near him. My hand rested on the edge of the bedding. Close, but not touching. Rook stared at my fingers for a long time. So long I forgot I was even holding still. Then, with a movement so slow I barely noticed it at first, he shifted. The tip of his paw touched the edge of my hand. That was it. That was the whole moment. No drama. No fireworks. Just contact. Two broken things, trying to figure out if it was safe to be whole again. The frost on the windows the next morning looked like lace, thin and fragile. The forest beyond was still every branch coated in silver. I didn't wake to barking. I didn't wake to movement. I woke to warmth. Rook had moved during the night. He was closer to the fireplace now, curled tighter body, pressed just inches from where I had fallen asleep in the chair. Still not touching, but near. Near enough to mean something. It wasn't trust yet, but it was a beginning. I stood up quietly and brewed coffee strong enough to put hair on a rock. But my eyes weren't on the mug. They were on the dog. Rook's gaze flicked toward me as I moved. He didn't lift his head, just watched. Always watching. Healing doesn't come like a movie scene. There's no music swell, no moment of epiphany. Sometimes healing shows up as a dog, letting you sit down without flinching. I made him a bowl, soft food boiled chicken, a little bone broth. I set it down near the fireplace. He didn't move. Not until I sat down beside him. Then, inch by inch, like someone had wired pain into his nerves, Rook crawled toward the bowl and began to eat. Slowly, cautiously. Every few bites he stopped to glance at me, waiting, watching for the shoe to drop. I didn't move. I didn't speak, just stayed there. The days that followed were filled with small victories and unspoken warnings. Rook's limp didn't improve. In fact, it seemed worse some days. The cold made it stiffen, and short walks in the yard showed how much he was compensating. Still, he tried. Always tried. On the third day, I decided to brush him. His coat was a matted mess, and it hurt to look at it. I started gently. Long, slow strokes down his back while he lay near the porch in the afternoon sun. He tolerated it, eyes half-lidded. But when I moved toward his hindquarters, just one stroke near the back leg, everything changed. He whipped around like a coiled spring. A snarl burst out of him, not to bite, not to attack, but a sound made entirely of memory and terror. His body spun tail-tucked, teeth bared his eyes, not angry, just pleading. I froze. The brush dropped to the dirt. He backed away, trembling heart, thudding in his chest. I could see it under the fur. I didn't say a word, didn't move toward him. I just knelt slowly, palms up. Rook stayed on the edge of the rug, panting, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. 10 long minutes passed before he took one step, then another, until finally his snout nudged into my open hand. Not trust, just surrender and exhaustion. Later that night, while checking on the leg again more gently this time, I noticed something under the fur. Not just an injury, not just a twist from bad luck or old damage. Circular patches, small, precise, some healed, some still raw. Burns, intentional. Done by someone who knew exactly where a dog couldn't reach to scratch, couldn't bite to defend. I stopped. My fingers hovered above his skin, my breath caught in my throat. And for the first time since bringing him home, I felt something hot and violent creep into my chest. Rage. I didn't let it out. Didn't let it touch him. Instead, I stood and walked to the bedroom. Pulled out the old leather-bound journal I hadn't opened in years, sat at the table, and began to write. Not for anyone else. Just to empty the weight sitting on my ribs. The words poured out like blood from a reopened wound. I should have said something. Back then. Why did I know names, places, memories I had tried to bury? Meanwhile, Rook stirred by the fire. His sleep was restless. Whimpers escaped his mouth, small wounded sounds like he was trapped in a loop behind his eyelids. I moved quietly, knelt by his side, and whispered, "You're not there anymore." He flinched once, then settled. The nightmares faded. But the questions, they stayed. And in the daylight that followed, more pieces fell into place. He hated the sound of chains. When I dropped a metal bowl, he bolted under the table. He growled, not at strangers, not at loud noises, but at uniforms. One day, I wore a cap with a badge stitched into it. Just an old hat from my contracting days. His entire posture changed. Hackles raised, teeth bared. Someone had trained him to fear, to obey through pain, to react not to danger, but to symbols of control. Whoever had done this hadn't just broken his body. They'd broken his language, his memory, his sense of the world. But there was something else I couldn't ignore, something that didn't quite fit. Every time he looked at me, it wasn't fear, wasn't suspicion. It was recognition, like he already knew me, not from the auction, From before, I felt it too. That strange itch in the back of your mind when something familiar shows up in a place it shouldn't. As if this wasn't the first time we'd crossed paths. Not a meeting, a return. That night, the silence in the cabin changed. It didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt loaded, like the walls were listening, like something was waiting just outside the edge of the firelight. And when the knock came, 3 slow, heavy taps, I knew something was shifting. I didn't move right away. Neither did Rook. We both lifted our heads at the same time, instinct crawling through our bones like an echo. I opened the door. Deputy Marshal Lance Dwyer stood on the porch, brown canvas jacket, badge on his belt, his face unreadable. "Evening," he said. "Sorry for the hour." He paused. "There was a break-in over at the old Wilcox Ranch. Figured you'd want to know. You used to do work out there, didn't you?" I said nothing. But Rook stepped forward, not growling, not aggressive, just alert. He'd heard that name before. Not the deputy, the ranch. Dwyer left a card, said nothing else. When the door closed, I locked it, then stood in the center of the cabin breathing like I'd just run a mile. The dog didn't blink. He just stared, like he knew what came next. Later that night, I stepped outside into the cold, the air sharp enough to sting my lungs. Rook followed me, limping quietly at my side, the way he always did, now never ahead, never behind, just with me. The shed behind the cabin hadn't been opened in years. It smelled like rusted nails and lost time. I moved to the back corner where the old crate sat, under a dusty tarp. I pulled it free, hesitated, and then flipped the latch. Inside was everything I'd packed away from a life I didn't talk about, an army patch frayed and faded, a photo of me younger, cleaner, standing beside a different German shepherd, not Rook, but one that looked eerily close. There was a burned leather collar, cracked and blackened at the edges. Beneath that, old receipts from ranch work, including several from the Wilcox property. One in particular made my hand clench into a fist. It had a signature I thought I'd never have to see again. I stood there in silence. The dog watched me from the doorway, not blinking, not moving, like he already knew what was in that box before I did. His eyes didn't ask, they just confirmed. We didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch, the box open beside me. Rook curled at my feet. The cold didn't bother me. The quiet didn't either. What haunted me was the name at the bottom of that receipt, the same name I'd spent years trying to forget. The name tied to everything I never wanted to admit I'd been close to. What I had done when I lifted my hand at that auction wasn't a rescue. It wasn't redemption either. It was the beginning of a reckoning. By the time the sky began to pale with morning light, I knew what I had to do. The frost on the roof was already melting. Rook paced near the door, agitated ears, flicking at every sound. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. He knew too. The Wilcox Ranch sat at the edge of Custer National Forest, a stretch of land where the trees held their secrets like coffins. The gravel road twisted, like it didn't want to be followed. Pines leaned overhead, casting shadows, longer than they should have been. I didn't say a word as I drove. Rook sat tall in the passenger seat, alert, staring through the windshield, as if he was watching for ghosts. When we reached the ranch, the place looked even more ruined than I remembered. Fences, splintered windows shattered the barn roofs, sagging like they were mourning something. But it wasn't time or weather that had broken this place. It was abandonment. Willful, intentional. We didn't head for the house. Rook moved toward the backfield, ignoring everything else, his nose low, his steps slow. He stopped near a patch of tall grass that looked no different than any other, but he crouched low and sniffed deep. Then he pawed at the dirt once, twice. He looked up. There were shallow depressions in the earth, not enough to be graves, but not nothing either. I dropped to one knee, placed a hand on the ground. It was damp. "Is this it?" I asked, not expecting an answer. Rook didn't whimper, didn't bark, just let out a long, slow exhale, and sat beside me. The weight of that breath pressed into my chest harder than any words. I remembered things I'd spent years burying. Old jobs, fast money, people who didn't ask questions, sounds from barns I never went back to, and the way I walked away from it all pretending that made me innocent. It didn't. Complicity doesn't vanish because you look away. Rook leaned gently against my shoulder, barely touching, but I felt it all the same. There was no judgment in that contact, just presence. Forgiveness, maybe, or understanding. We stayed there, man and dog, in a field soaked with ghosts, and then something shifted. As we turned back toward the truck, movement caught my eye. A figure, quick, darting behind the barn. Someone was watching. I stepped forward, but Rook growled a low guttural warning. I stopped. Whoever it was, they didn't show themselves again. I didn't follow. Instead, I reached into the glove compartment, pulled out a notepad, and wrote 3 words. It's not over. The drive home was even quieter than the one before. But it wasn't empty. It was charged. Rook sat close, breathing steady. We had seen the dirt, felt what was buried. Now we needed answers. Back at the cabin, I placed the notepad on the table beside the open box. Then I started making calls. Old numbers. Contacts I hadn't spoken to in years. Ranch hands. Auctioneers. People who knew what really happened behind the clean walls of the livestock industry. I needed to know who ran the Wilcox auctions. Who moved the dogs. Who made the money. As the fire crackled behind me, Rook curled on the rug, not facing the door anymore. Facing me. Because we weren't just survivors now. We were a team. And the silence wasn't keeping secrets anymore. It was waiting for the truth. The very next morning, I poured half a cup of lukewarm coffee, tossed a rope, a flashlight, and a first aid kit into the truck, and loaded Rook into the passenger seat. We headed east, toward Bozeman. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. There was only one person left who might know more about what happened to Rook, and to the others, like him. Dr. Alina Merrick. Bozeman rose on the horizon like a town that had decided to grow up without asking permission. Wider roads, tighter corners, more polished edges. But my grip on the steering wheel only got tighter with every mile we drove in. I hadn't set foot in that vet clinic in years. Not since Alina and I stopped talking. Not since the silence between us got too loud to ignore. But if there was anyone who could read through Rook's injuries, understand the things I didn't have the words for, it was her. The clinic hadn't changed much. Still had that smell of antiseptic and wet fur. The soft hum of machines behind closed doors. I pushed through the glass door, and the receptionist's eyes widened, like she'd seen a ghost. Dr. Merrick, she called out immediately. She didn't even ask my name. And then there she was, Alina. Her sleeves were rolled, her eyes sharp, wiping her hands on a stained towel that had seen more than its share of late nights. She didn't smile, didn't ask why I was there. Her gaze dropped straight to Rook. He walked in beside me, quiet, but alert, his limp pronounced on the slick floor. He sat near the exam table on his own, tense, but still, watching her, watching me, like he knew this moment mattered. Alina crouched without a word, reached a hand toward his neck. He didn't flinch. That, more than anything, told her something. "Let's take a look," she said, standing up and leading us into the exam room. Inside, the air felt thick, not from heat, but from things unsaid. The kind of quiet that has to be handled gently, or it'll cut you open. She checked his vitals, lifted his paw, ran her fingers along his ribs and spine, but when she brushed aside the fur along his flank, she froze. "These aren't from a fence," she said under her breath. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer right away. She leaned in, lifted his fur a little more. "Old scar tissue, burn rings." She moved again, found another near his chest. "This pattern, it's not random. It's too deliberate." She looked up at me, her face hard, her voice low. "These are from shock prods." The silence that followed nearly caved in the room. I swallowed hard, my hands curled on my knees. I'd heard stories, backroom rumors on backcountry ranches, dogs forced to submit through electric pain, made to obey, or worse, made to break, made to hate. Alina stepped back and exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath since I walked through the door. "He's not just abused," she said. "He was trained to survive something he never should have had to." Then she turned toward the machine and pulled up a scan. "There's a chip," she said quietly. "Still active." The monitor flickered, pulled from a digital record that hadn't been touched in years. A name blinked onto the screen. My stomach dropped before she even said it. Rook had once been registered under a livestock holding facility. Yellowstone County. Shut down 5 years ago. And listed as his owner, Everett Rohr. The name hit like a hammer to the chest. I stood there, stunned, but not surprised. Rohr was the man behind the curtain. The one whose name no one said too loud. The one who ran the kind of operation where animals disappeared, and people like me kept our heads down for the sake of a paycheck. I had worked for him once. Shoeing horses, fixing trailers. But I'd heard the dogs, heard the chains, saw things I should have questioned. And I didn't. Alina's voice broke the tension, reading the last line off the scan aloud, almost like she didn't want to believe it. Owner of record Everett Rohr. Rook didn't blink. He turned his head slightly, looked at me, not with accusation, but with something deeper, like he already knew. and had been waiting for me to catch up. Alina said nothing else. She didn't have to. She could see it in my face, that unraveling happening quietly in the corner of the room. A lifetime of pretending crashing down under the weight of a dog's stare. I moved toward the door, but paused. "Keep the scan," I said. "Don't delete anything." Outside, the wind had picked up. I stood by the truck for a long time. Before opening the door, I hand on the handle. My eyes closed. I whispered something only Rook could hear. A name, a place, and a promise. Because now this wasn't just about healing. It was about ending something. Something that should have been ended years ago. That night, Sleep didn't even try to visit me. Roar's name echoed like thunder between the walls of the cabin, loud and cruel. He wasn't just a memory anymore, he was a door that had blown wide open, dragging every ghost I'd ever tried to bury out with it. By the time the sky started shifting from black to gray, I was already on the porch, a thermos of half-drunk coffee in one hand, Rook lying near my feet, his head resting on my boot, breathing slow, present. The bond between us had changed. I could feel it. He wasn't just following anymore. He was witnessing. He was remembering, with me. I walked back to the shed and pulled out a box I hadn't touched in over a decade. Inside were the remnants of another life. A contractor ID, old photos, a stub from a paycheck with Roar's name printed at the top. Proof, not legal, but real, and enough to stir the kind of fire in your gut that doesn't go out. I had been there, heard things, saw things. I needed the money, so I looked away. Now that same silence I had helped maintain had come back to find me, and this time it had teeth. The weight of that box didn't come from its contents. It came from what it meant. Proof I had once been close enough to smell the rot and still walked away. And now I was holding the receipts. Literally. I didn't waste time. I called Deputy Marshal Lance Dwyer. Short conversation, no small talk. We met at a corner cafe, the kind where the coffee is bitter and the furniture hasn't changed since the 90s. It was the kind of place where secrets felt out of place. I told him everything. No embellishments, no excuses, just the truth. I worked under Roar, I said. I saw the cages. I heard the screams. Dwyer didn't interrupt, just nodded slowly, his jaw working quietly, as I laid down the scan from Alina, the one that pulled Rook's old registry, the one with Roar's name stamped in black and white. He looked at it for a long time. "That's the dog?" he finally asked. "Yeah," I said. "I bought him at auction. Didn't know it then, but now I do." Dwyer rubbed a hand through his beard. Roar disappeared when the co-op collapsed. No address, no records, no trail. I leaned in. "I can find him." Dwyer didn't ask how. "Men like me don't make promises lightly. If you do," he said, voice low, "don't do anything stupid." I gave him half a smile. Not the warm kind. Too late for that. When I got back to the cabin, Rook met me at the door. No bark. Just that look, the one that had started showing up more and more. Like he already knew the next move. He stood without needing to be called and walked to the truck. We weren't waiting anymore. The next morning, I packed only what mattered. A rope, first aid, flashlight, the old revolver I hadn't touched in years. Rook hopped into the passenger seat like this was something we'd done before in another life. We didn't speak on the drive out of town. We didn't need to. The silence between us said more than any words could. We were going back to the Wilcox Ranch, not for closure, for something heavier. The road curved like it was trying to avoid what lay ahead, but I didn't steer away. The gate still hung crooked. The barn still leaned like it had secrets pressed against the beams. We didn't go to the front. We went straight for the clearing. Same path, same overgrown grass. But this time Rook didn't sniff or paw softly. He dug, hard. I dropped to my knees beside him, bare hands, pulling at damp earth. We worked in tandem, like our bones remembered this place, even if our mouths wouldn't speak it. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, my fingers hit something solid. A metal box, small, rusted, wrapped in what had once been cloth, now just mold and rot. I didn't open it right away. My heart pounded like a drumline against my ribs, but I peeled the cloth away. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Dogs, caged, burned, torn. Some were barely recognizable. There were documents, too. Payment ledgers, transport records, auction slips with numbers and names I knew too well. At the very bottom, a list. I scanned it. There it was. My name. Beside a job I didn't want to remember. Shoeing. Transport. No questions. My breath caught. Rook scraped the side of the box again. I looked down. Another photo had slipped under the rest. Not old, not faded. The dog, Rook, leaner, younger. A chain tied around his chest. A kennel tag in the frame, number 1479. I looked at him. He looked back. And there was no hate in his eyes. Just that same question he'd been asking since the auction. Now, do you see? I stood hands shaking. Packed everything into a canvas bag. We left the ranch without a word. But something inside me was already screaming. Back in Bozeman, I didn't call ahead. I walked into the sheriff's office with the bag in one hand and a dog in the other. Dwyer saw me coming and stood up. He looked at my face. Whatever he saw, there it was enough. I dropped the bag on the desk. This is everything. By nightfall, the manhunt was reopened. Roar's name hit the federal database like wildfire. Agencies picked it up. Old files were dusted off. Leads that had gone cold sparked again. It wasn't just whispers anymore. It was real. The next morning, snow drifted gently through the downtown air. Rook and I stepped out of the station and people paused. Some recognized us. From the auction video. From the stories. No one said a word right away. But they watched us, the way people watch something sacred, without knowing why. I looked down at him. You ready to go home? His tail wagged. Just once. We didn't head for the cabin. We headed for something new. A small stretch of land outside Livingston I'd been working on quietly. No fences, no chains, just open air, space to heal. Rook would be the first one there, not just as a rescue, but as a guardian. Because some stories aren't just about surviving. They're about returning. One broken soul lifting another, until neither remembers who saved who. As for Roar, that trail is being hunted now. The silence he once built his kingdom on is coming back for him with teeth. And we don't have to look back. We already know what lies behind us. And what lies ahead. Justice. The new place wasn't much to look at yet. Just a patch of frostbitten ground, tucked along the back roads of Livingston raw, open waiting. But that was kind of the point. It wasn't built to impress. It was built to offer what we never got: safety without strings. No chains. No voices raised in anger. No rooms with locked doors and screaming hidden behind walls. Just peace. Rook stepped out of the truck without needing encouragement. His paws crunched against the snow-tinged grass, his nose lifted to the sky, like he was breathing in something sacred. It was still cold, still wild, but it was his. It was home. I'd poured months of planning into this place. Quiet visits to the zoning office, long drives after dark, with measuring tape and blueprints stuffed into the glove box. I never told anyone. Didn't even tell myself why I was doing it until Rook came into my life. But now I knew. This wasn't just land. It was a promise. There would be cabins eventually, kennels that weren't cages, heated beds, volunteers, maybe a vet on call once I convinced Alina to come on board, if not for me, then for the mission. But for now, it was just us. And that was enough. I watched as Rook wandered the perimeter, not with suspicion, but with something close to wonder. Like he didn't quite believe it was real. Like part of him still expected a collar to snap tight around his throat at any second. He paused near a patch of pine and looked back at me. I gave him a nod. You're safe here. He didn't move for a long moment. Then he lay down in the snow limb, tucked head raised, eyes scanning the horizon, standing guard, like he had always meant to. That night we stayed in the truck, slept under old flannel blankets, the heater turned low. The stars spread out above us in a sky so wide, it made the past feel small. Rook slept deeper than I'd ever seen. No whimpers, no twitches, just stillness. I leaned my head back and stared at the ceiling of the cab, listening to the soft breath of the dog who had changed everything. I used to think I needed to run from my past, to survive it. Turns out I just needed to face it with the right company. In the weeks that followed, word spread. People started to reach out. Old contacts, quiet phone calls. Strangers I'd never met who'd heard whispers of the auction dog, the scarred man who bought him, and the land they were clearing for something different. Some called it a rescue. Some called it a sanctuary. I didn't call it anything. It was just what needed to be. Rook became the symbol, not a mascot, not a miracle, but proof. Proof that a life torn to pieces can still have purpose. That even in the quiet aftermath of cruelty, there can be something sacred if someone is willing to stay. We took in our first dog 3 weeks later. Then 2 more, then 5. Each one different. Each one carrying something you couldn't see in their posture or their bite history, but in their eyes. That silent question. Will this hurt too? Rook met each of them at the gate. Not barking, not dominant, just there. present, like he was saying, I know what it's like. You're safe now. I never once saw him flinch again. As for Roar, the manhunt spread like a prairie fire. Tips came in. Dead ends piled up. But there were leads now, real ones. Names that matched aliases. Old properties with evidence. Voices rising from places where silence had ruled for too long. Justice moves slow, but it moves. And I'd wait for it as long as it took. Because this time, I wasn't running. I had something to build. Something to protect. One morning I stood on the porch of the main cabin, still half-built, still needing paint, and watched the fog burn off the land. Dogs moved through the clearing in pairs and threes. Some limped, some barked, some still huddled in corners, learning that peace doesn't have to be earned. Rook sat beside me, older now, still strong but slower in the mornings, his muzzle grayer, his eyes softer. He leaned against my leg, with the weight of a story that had already been told 1,000 times without a single word. And I leaned back. We stayed there for a while, watching the land, the light, the lives being stitched back together in slow, quiet ways. Not bad, huh? I whispered. Rook didn't wag his tail. He didn't have to. He was already home.